Okay, and welcome to another episode of All Things Xbox Podcast. This week, once again, I have with me Logan. Logan, how you doing?
Doing great, Jamie. How about yourself?
Good, good. There's been a lot happening this week. I don't think a lot of people actually expected the news we got this week, but we're going to go over some stuff in a bit. I want to start talking about the Halo stuff because you sent me that news stuff a few hours ago, and before we get into all the game and stuff, I just want to say, people, if you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe. Really helps the channel out. So Halo, the TV series, it's on Paramount Plus in the US and Canada, and people like it. But the thing is, when it comes to a TV show, it's going to be very divisive and stuff. But people have been wanting a live action, Halo movie or Halo series for years, and it finally debuted this year. But once again, in the UK and pretty much everywhere else in the world, we have to wait. But it's finally coming. It's coming to Sky. So if you subscribe to Sky Cinema, you're going to get all that Paramount Plus content for free. And if not, the app's going to be available, separately on Roku boxes. It's pretty much going to be on every console, I believe, because, that's what these app makers do. But it's about time, because there's been times in the past where a TV show launches in the US and sometimes we've had to wait like 4 months. Like I remember Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., we had to wait 4 months for that after it debuted in the US. And it's like, that's a bit much. It's like, at that point, you're just seeing spoilers all the time, and it gets to a point where it's so watered down, you think, oh, well, I know everything that's happening. But, Halo, there's a big fan base, and a lot of people have been waiting for it, and it's good to, have it finally coming over to the UK finally. But Logan, we were talking about before the show, it's like, you've enjoyed the show, right?
Yeah, I've been one of the people that are on the hill that I enjoy the show. I embrace it for what it is. It's different. It's fresh. It's a unique take. I'm a big lore guru and fan. I read books, I have the graphic novel, like the encyclopedias, these whatever. Like I'm all in on Halo, and this does do things differently, but I see enough inspiration from those things and the game where I like what they're doing. They've I won't get into spoilers obviously because you and there are others out there that obviously haven't seen it yet, but it it delves into some stuff from the books and other things, but in a different way. I know a lot of people have been flustered about the helmet thing. That seems to be a hill some want to die on. The hill, like he just could not have his helmet off at all. No discussions. But I mean, the way I look at it, like I was telling you earlier, is it kind of reminds me of a lot of Mass Effect vibes, where Chief is in his combat fatigues. Instead of walking around the Citadel or the Normandy, he's walking around on Reach or wherever in his fatigues, talking with people while he's not in live fire. I mean, if you think about it, that's how a bunch of these series work in lore and games and movies and everything. Like they're not always in combat mode. So it makes sense to show them not in combat mode sometimes. And then when you see them put the helmet on, you're like, okay, it's things going down. And I like changes they've made in some areas. Some areas have kind of been a little head scratching. Like I've been, I didn't see that, but I'll roll with it. But overall, I've been quite enjoying it. And apparently, a lot of other people have been. That or they're hate watching because it's getting really good numbers on Paramount. They released a thing today about it, saying it's a global hit, and they're thrilled with it. It was one of their like three or four biggest, basically tent poles that they were talking about. So all in all, it sounds like a lot of people are actually enjoying the Halo show.
Yeah, I can't wait for it. Before we get into like all the other game and stuff, like I'm a huge sci-fi fan. It's even in my Twitter profile. I'm a sci-fi nut. But with it being a sci-fi fan, you kind of have to deal with the fact that for years we didn't really have big sci-fi TV shows. There was like this huge gap in between. I want to say the end of Stargate Atlantis and I think what 2009 or something, and then you had Star Trek Discovery. So you had like almost a decade in between of like not really any big star or should I say sci-fi shows. And then now we have Mandalorian. and all that stuff. Star Trek Strange New Worlds is coming out soon, and as a sci-fi fan, seeing Halo, get the recognition it's deserved. It's made me happy, and plus, you were saying like it reminds you of Mass Effect because he takes his suit off when he's walking around the ship and stuff, and that makes sense because if it was a 2 hour long, Halo film, I would expect Chief to wear his suit pretty much the whole time. But if it's a TV series set over weeks or months, like he's not going to wear the whole thing, the suit the whole time. So it makes sense. But yeah, it's finally coming to the UK and other countries. When I get the full list of all the countries and when it's going to be on, I'll post that on Twitter. But yeah, good stuff. Before we get into some of the other gaming news topics, I want to talk a little bit about Elden Ring. Because this thing happened yesterday with me with Elden Ring. And if people have been following me on Twitter for a while, they'll notice I've done this in the past with other games, is that when I play a role-playing game, and you get upgrade points, could be for whatever RPG you can think of, could be Deus Ex, Witcher 3, the list goes on. I hoard, skill points. So it gets to a point later in the game where I'm getting towards the end, and I'm basically, minimum spec character, and I've unintentionally made the game more difficult for myself. Did this in the Outer Worlds, Fallout, literally everything. So I'm playing Elden Ring, and I'm about 75 hours in. And for the past 40 hours of the game, I've been using a longsword plus 4. So it's just a simple longsword I've upgraded 4 times, and I completely forgot that you could upgrade weapons in the game. It's just something I never paid attention to. And throughout the game, you get these things called smithing stones, and you get them to, level up your sword X amount of times. And I got to a point where I'm like, these bosses are absolutely destroying me, and I need something better. But I like the moveset of the longsword, so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to use all these smithing stones and see how good this simple longsword can get. So I go to the smith dude, or whatever you call him, and I go up to a longsword plus 19, right? And these 6 bosses in particular that I've struggled for maybe 20 hours with or so, I steamrolled through them in about 20 minutes. So for the past 40 hours, I've made Elden Ring probably 10 times harder than it needed to be. Because now I'm just steamrolling bosses. Some of the hardest bosses in the game, which I've played literally last night, I literally went past in a minute and a half. So if people are loving Elden Ring or thinking about getting into it, don't do what I did, because there's maybe a 10-hour chunk of my gameplay of Elden Ring where I'm just grinding my teeth the whole time, and the game was frustrating. And it wasn't because the game's frustrating, it's because I made it frustrating myself. You've been playing Elden Ring, right? You've been upgrading your character, I'm guessing, yeah?
Yeah, I am. I actually finally beat it. I had solely focused pretty much on Elden Ring, and after about 189 hours, I think, in it, I got the ending I wanted, the moon ending, which is with Ronnie and her quest line and stuff. I won't get into spoilers, but it's one of the secret endings you can get. And so I spent a lot of time making sure I did that, and did all the bosses I could find, gathered most of the legendary weapons, and then like you, I had been having a few bosses that were kicking my tail, and then I realized I hadn't upgraded my weapons in a while. And so then I upgrade one sword to a plus 25, and then upgrade another one that's a legendary to plus 10 with the max it could go. And then man, those guys were getting mowed down. And then the game is very much also different summons work for different bosses. Spirit jellyfish might work against this boss, but against this one, the wolves are better because you have 3 of them and they can kind of each hit while you distract, and yada yada yada. But it's definitely unquestionably my game of the year so far. I think Starfield will give it a run for its money. We can talk more about that later. But all in all, love Elden Ring.
Yeah, so we can agree that the whole leveling up thing works for your weapons. It's they clearly meant to do that, and if people hoard points like me, or items don't Like like I put it like this: I went through about 6 bosses in about 20 minutes. Like that shouldn't have been possible for like I've thought I've been really bad at the game. It's like no, it's like the weapon I was using was just terrible. It wasn't leveled up properly, and there was a boss, a dual boss, which when it comes to these games, I'm terrible at dual bosses. Like I will call
Oh,
and
they're
help.
awful.
Yeah,
Man.
I just can't do it. And there's these bosses in the game called watchdogs. They're basically cats with masks, and they basically hover in the air, slamming at the ground. They're not nice to fight. They are pretty like difficult. Anyways, so
Yeah.
yeah, so I was like struggling, and I'm like, I'm gonna rage quit this game any moment now. But after I leveled up my swords and called in the mimic tier, I literally finished the whole thing in about 20 seconds. And I was just face palming the whole time because I made this game so incredibly difficult, more than it needed to be, just because I feel the need to hoard items and points in games. So that's a lesson learned, and I think people should level up their weapons if they're going to play this game. I was saying last week on the podcast, like when the tech test came out, I was telling people like if you don't like Dark Souls or Soul style games, do not play this game. But I think it might currently be my game of the year, and I went into this year thinking, oh, it's going to be Dying Light 2, but Elden Ring has just completely blown away my expectations, and people that aren't Souls fans, they're gonna like it. The reason why people are talking about it so much is because it's fresh. It's not this bloated open world filled with a million icons where you're being offered microtransactions, quests all over the place, where the game's directing you where to go, and like part of its charm is the fact that you don't know where to go. The game doesn't it doesn't really tell you where to go and what to do, but you do find out. And the cool thing about the Elden Ring community is that people are willing to help. You ask online and people will answer within seconds. So yeah, I think people need to pay more attention to Elden Ring, and we'll talk about Starfield later in the show with some information that came out about that. Starfield may end up being my game of the year. It might end up being Hogwarts Legacy, but when it comes to games this year, it's gonna be really difficult. If everything lives up to the hype, which I believe it will, uh, this year will end up going down, in the history books alongside, 2007 and 2010. Like those years were excellent for games. So yeah, Elden Ring, wow, like incredible game. Yeah, we'll move on because I could talk about Elden Ring all day. So Battlefield came out, and that came out in what, November 2021.
Honestly, can't remember.
Yeah, and like I'm trying to think how I can put this politely. It came out and it was like a fart in the wind. It did not leave any impact whatsoever, and honestly, it was just a bunch of disappointment. That game had a lot of hype going into the launch because it gave people that feeling of Battlefield, that came out in 2013. This modern era, a ton of players on screen and just what people wanted, and it just came out and it isn't what people wanted. And it got to a point where the game had over or under 1,000 players concurrently on Steam, which is pretty bad considering Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 have sometimes 6 times that amount all these years later. And it's like that is a prime example of games being designed wrong. Trying to make we've seen this for other games in the past. A company will see success in other areas and they'll try and turn their franchise or their game into this other thing to chase trends, which we will talk about Square in a bit for doing this. But Battlefield was chasing trends. It didn't know if it wanted to be Call of Duty or Rainbow Six Siege, and it didn't succeed in either, really. It didn't have a battle royale because it was originally designed as a battle royale game, but then they changed it last minute. It's like it had a horrible production cycle, and it's a bad game. Like I do not like hating on games, but Battlefield 2042 is just terrible. you know. Anyway, it might be coming to Game Pass soon. EA's games do come to EA Play and Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. And sometimes it's been a year after a launch, be it a sports game, Mass Effect, Legendary Edition, the Need for Speed games. We do get the EA games eventually in the service, and there's been a lot of articles over the past, a few months about big titles launching an Xbox Game Pass, and we've seen that, it's been a huge success for games. Outriders had a huge launch because of Game Pass, multiplayer focused game. You know, Guardians of the Galaxy had a new breath of life to the point where, the developers were talking about it all the time, like how all these new people were experiencing the game for the first time, and they loved Game Pass because of it, and they loved the game because of it. And, you know, we've seen a lot of developers over the past year and a half give praise to Xbox Game Pass because it's given a lot of people, a chance to play the game with no risk. And then a lot of people do end up buying the game. People have told me they've bought Guardians of the Galaxy because it's been in the service and they're enjoying it. And, we've seen this with other games. The bike game, Descenders, same thing, had a huge success in Game Pass and then it sold a lot more. And, I think Battlefield, launching an Xbox Game Pass, it's obviously going to increase the player base, but I think it gets to a point where a game can be like so bad, I don't think it'll help. You know, I know, Logan, you said you never really played Battlefield 2042, but do you think that it launching or should I say, going to Game Pass in maybe the next few months might actually help?
Well, it certainly couldn't not help at this point. I mean, when a game is in such a cluster of a state, we'll call it that, as it is right now, I mean, Game Pass is only going to help. I mean, you get more people to try it, more people in the community, more people reaching out and giving pointers or ideas to development. I mean, they're legally, like we you've mentioned before, they owe it that they're going to do at least a year of content and stuff. So, I mean, what better way to test things and get things going than through Game Pass? Is it enough to save it? I don't know, but you never know if you don't try. So I think it's best bet if it's gonna have a second lease on life is Game Pass.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, that game had a lot of hype because, the trailer was amazing. But all the stuff you see in the trailer doesn't happen in the game. you know, Huge fields of people running towards like the battle and there's explosions and stuff, and it's like that doesn't happen. And over time, since that game launched, it hasn't reached its first season yet, by the way. Season 2 of Halo Infinite's multiplayer launched today, and people are telling me they're really enjoying it. I haven't played it yet, but hey, season two's out. But with Battlefield, like season 1 starts this summer, and they keep pushing it back. And the fact that it didn't have a scoreboard at launch, a multiplayer PvP game not having a scoreboard, it's like, well, then what's the point of playing? But that game's been through like horrendous development. Obviously the pandemic didn't help because a lot of games were, let's face it, the pandemic affected pretty much every single game in the industry. But like EA just doesn't know what to do with that franchise. As soon as that did bad numbers, EA start talking about doing 2042 as its own universe with spin-off games. They were going to do a hero shooter, and now they're not going to do that, thankfully. That's just a horrendous thing. It kind of insults me that they were thinking that. They have Battlefield Mobile, which is essentially Battlefield 3, but it's just locked to a mobile device, and like I would love to play that on console. But it's just like EA is just like they don't know what to do with that franchise, and I think the franchise is potentially done, and I hate to say that, but Game Pass could give this one game, some life. It needs it. Like the fact that people can play entire games and not see other people, that's a problem. That's always going to be a problem with multiplayer. And as we've seen in the past, Game Pass has helped these games, so I wish them the best, but Battlefield 2042 is not the direction people want to see this franchise moving. And it's a shame. It really is a shame because Battlefield used to be my favorite go-to multiplayer experience in 2011 when Battlefield 3 came out. But ever since, they've just had like misstep after misstep. Battlefield 4 in 2013 came out and it was a buggy mess to the point where you couldn't play the campaign with saves for about a year. Like, you had to play the whole campaign in one sitting if you wanted to finish it. Then you had Battlefield 1, which was, it had an amazing graphics. Probably even better than, Battlefield 2042, but, it turned into snipers only pretty much from the day it launched. Like, if you go into any match, it's just snipers. Then Battlefield 5 came out, and everyone knows the controversy with that, but it isn't what people wanted. They kind of lied about the amount of support it was going to get, and it's like, people want to complain about Call of Duty and Halo multiplayer. Battlefield is in a bad state, like horrendous. But hopefully, we'll talk about that again when it actually launches in Game Pass, which I don't think it'll be too far away now. I want to talk about the whole Embracer Group thing because this is going to be a long topic and pretty much a large chunk of the show. So, on this podcast, on this channel, and on Twitter for years now, I've been talking about, and this is my blood's going to boil over the next half an hour when I'm talking about this. So, Embracer Group, they are this conglomerate, game publishing company that have a lot of developers. They have like 100 different studios. It's ridiculous, and no one ever talks about monopolies with them. It's just they have a lot of studios. They're going to put out a lot of games. This has been the case for years now. Well, they randomly, just bought Gearbox a few months back, right? And it surprised people. It's like, Gearbox, really? And they got them for I think it was like $1.3 billion. It was something high. And people, expected them to go quiet. But it turns out we got news this week that Embracer Group just bought Eidos Montreal and Crystal Dynamics and also Square Enix Montreal, which I think they'll have to rename the studio. But, that's huge news because, I've been wanting Square Enix to kind of sell off their Western, game development arm for years now. I've ranted about this on here, Twitter, whatever, and, I finally got my wish because those studios put out quality games over and over and over again, and they always get this weird treatment by Square Enix to the point where we've all seen the memes. Square Enix puts out a game, they market it incorrectly, and then when it doesn't meet their lofty sales expectations, they basically blame the Western games for any dips in their financial reports, and that stuff just makes my blood boil. I can't stand that. I can't imagine what it's like to work at one of those studios and they put out a quality game like Guardians of the Galaxy and they market it incorrectly and then they get thrown under the bus. Yet a game like Strangers of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origins, nobody mentions that. Bale in Wonderland or whatever it's called doesn't get mentioned at all. And those two games, I'm guessing, didn't do too well. But they won't mention that. And this has been happening for years. This has been happening since, I want to say, 2013 with the Tomb Raider reboot, which was an amazing game, and it didn't do the 7+ million they wanted. And it's that is ridiculous. Then they had Deus Ex Mankind Divided, which had a horrible, absolutely horrible marketing thing going on. It's Square Enix basically put it we're going to have different goals for the amounts of how should I put it, pre-orders down. So if we had X amount of million people pre-order this game a month in advance, we would actually release the game early. It was horrible. You know how when Forza comes out now and you can buy the deluxe edition and get the game 4 days early? Well, they were basically promising people the same thing, but they would continuously change up the release date depending on how many people were pre-ordered, which was terrible. You were basically putting a gun to people's faces and saying, look, you can get this game early, weeks early, even a month early, if you pre-order. And it's that was horrible. And Guardians of the Galaxy, people didn't know what it was. Every single time I talked about it, people were adamant that it was a live service game and it was, basically set in the Avengers universe. And the Avengers game, that's not a success. That's doing terrible at the minute. And it's Square Enix throws all their Western, studios under the bus. And, before I continue, Logan, what's your thought on the whole, Square Enix throwing their Western studios under the bus?
Yeah, I'm very much of the same opinion as you on this. It really irks me quite a bit. I it always just feels wrong that I mean, it's okay to be disappointed in how a studio does or performs and stuff. Like there are reasonable expectations to have. But when you come up with these ludicrously high numbers that aren't based on like feel out of touch with the reality on things, or you market something in a way to where it's almost set up to fail because you're putting it in a quarter or something where there's these mega hitters coming, or people think it's associated with the Avengers game when it clearly isn't, and they think it's a live service game when it's a single player narrative focused game, or you have um, just basically these schemes with your pre-ordering thing to where you're forcing payouts to get people to buy into the game so that you can release it early, but then it's going to be a shoddy product. It just it's mind blowing. And then you have the audacity to just say it didn't meet expectations, or we expected these numbers, or you guys never ever say you're just or rarely anyway, I don't hear it, of disappointment in some of their other franchises. Like, I'm sure they're not thrilled with Babylon's Fall. That game sure isn't setting the world on fire. Haven't heard too many peeps about that. Or some of their other games that have come out from their Eastern devs, whether that's the management issue, whether it's cultural issue, whatever. It's just it has been apparent for some time that the Western studios and the Eastern studios get different um, vibes of how things go. And so, like you, I've long wanted Western studios to be freed from them. Um, in a perfect world, I would have loved Xbox to have gotten them because you get Tomb Raider and Deus Ex and Legacy of Kain and Gex the Gecko and all these other just fun IPs, and can make them exclusive day one Game Pass, whatever. But or even Sony, I would have been fine with because I thought they have a good first party and they treat their studios well for the most part. But um, Embracer to me feels like a good happy medium choice. I know there's lots of memes about monopolies and the double standard there seems to be. Like Embracer, you look at how many studios they have. They have like it's ludicrous how many studios they have, and then how many publishers they have on top of that. They have Quicksilver, they have THQ Nordic, they have Gearbox, and then they buy studios under each label. Kind of like I'm wondering if Xbox will ever do, like with Bethesda and Activision Blizzard, if that happens. But suffice to say, they have a ton of employees and a ton of studios, and nobody bats an eye about it. My personal guess is because they generally buy small, and most of their studios are not in the U.S. Bunch of them, so maybe there's just less focus and less spotlight on it. But it is certainly interesting. I like them because they've brought back Time Splitters, they've brought back Kingdoms of Amalur, they're resurrecting other franchises. They're good in my books, personally. I like them. That they embrace, I know, pun intended, um, double A titles and kind of quirky indies and stuff that a lot of publishers aren't doing. So to me, it's a good second choice instead of Xbox getting them. But in a way, it is disappointing that Xbox couldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this in the community a lot over the past 24 hours. Like, people did want Microsoft to pick up, like, Crystal Dynamics. Like, that made more sense than anyone, really, because they can make action adventure games. They're already working on, Perfect Dark. That made sense. And I wanted Microsoft to get Eidos Montreal because I absolutely love Deus Ex. And honestly, I've been following Eidos Montreal since like they first opened, and I think they're just an interesting studio. I like how they create games, and it's like they deserve like a break. The treatment these studios got from Square is just ridiculous. But it's actually I think this kind of works out better for them because you're gonna have more freedom than pretty much ever before. All consoles still get the games, so that's a win for everyone. And the cool thing is that apparently the ownership of the Guardians of the Galaxy game and the Avengers game, whether people like it or not, apparently um apparently Embracer now also owns those, game licenses. Apparently Disney does have to, give the go ahead, but I can't see why not. So who knows? We might actually see a Guardians of the Galaxy 2 now. But these companies are very different. When Embracer start talking about Square Enix and them selling off their studios, like Embracer Group firmly made it clear that they want to spend the next 10 years putting out single player games, and like that was highlighted in their statement. Like they want to put out a lot of single player games over the next 10 years and a lot of AAA games. And if you look at a lot of their studios, they don't have many like big AAA studios. So like this is them pretty much getting into the AAA game. And if you look at a lot of games that Embracer Group, THQ Nordic make, all basically that entire arm, and then you look at like Focus Home Interactive, those publishers focus almost completely on single player games in an age when people are talking about wanting more single player games than ever before. So it's like I've been saying for ages now, people need to pay more attention to those games. Like, do they have the biggest production budgets? No. Are they still good? Yeah. And the thing is, Embracer Group, they constantly investing in games, so we will still see, big AAA games from Crystal Dynamics. I mean, they pretty much announced the new Tomb Raider game a few weeks ago, and that pretty much bumped up the price. And the price, I have to say, Embracer Group, they stole these studios, like 300
highway robbery.
Yeah, like $300 million for those three studios. Well, it's a few studios. And all those intellectual properties, that's mind blowing. Like Tomb Raider alone, I thought would have been worth close to $1 billion, just because the movie potential and pretty much all the licensed stuff, the merchandise. But like the fact that they got all that for 300 million is ridiculous, and good on them. The studios are going to be pretty much partying ever since that happened, because like they won't be thrown under the bus every 5 minutes. But I've got this list here of reasons why Square Enix actually sold them off, and oh my, like what was Square thinking? It's like, this is the entire list. So they sold off the studios so they'd have more capital for these. New investment in blockchain, AI, and cloud. This matches their CEO and what they've been talking about for the past year. Maximizing revenue. It is well known that Square Enix threw the above studios under the bus whenever sales reports came up. They're going to double down on Japanese studios, though Square Enix Limited Europe will be retained. So basically, the Just Cause stuff and Outriders, those licensed games will still be happening. But they sold Tomb Raider, they sold Deus Ex and their studios for blockchain? Really? Are they that dumb? And the thing is, gamers have complained about monetization in video games since we saw the horse armor in 2006, 2007. Like, people do not like having to spend more than they should. And over the years we've seen the introduction of mobile style microtransactions in full price $60-$70 games. And just as these new things come up with the blockchain and the NFTs, and then people, gamers, see the opportunity that they may be able to earn a little bit of money at the same time, now it's okay. Nah, not in my book. I'm not having any of that NFT crap in my video games. And the fact that Square Enix are leaning on this is ridiculous. Their first major live service game, Babylon's Fall, which was meant to be literally their tentpole, game, which is going to get content for years. It has under 10 players at the minute on Steam. People want to talk about Halo's Steam numbers, Babylon's Fall, and I'm not throwing Babylon's Fall under the bus because it's a PlayStation game. I'm throwing it under the bus because it's a Square Enix game, and it's a Square Enix game that isn't selling well. And I will talk about that all day. They threw the creators of Tomb Raider and Deus Ex under the bus, and that really, honestly, it just pisses me off. It really does. And the fact that, they just sold them for 300 million, that's ridiculous. And, Hacky Sack just mentioned in chat, Outcast 2. Now, this is a good thing, right? People have been talking about over the past 24 hours that will we see big games still from, Embracer Group. I'm just going to refer to them as THQ Nordic because that's what most people are going to see their games from anyway. But, look at Outcast 2, a sequel to a, 22-year-old game. And it's getting basically a AAA sequel this year. which a lot of people didn't even see coming. And they have all these developers putting out these remasters for games and ports, and we're going to see sequels to these. Like you were saying, THQ Nordic bought the rights to Kingdoms of Amalur, which had a lot of controversy in the past with the whole like development of that game. But it's a hell of an RPG. But they own the rights now. They put out a remaster, and it's also 4K 60 frames per second on Xbox One X and Series X, and it's a fantastic game. And we're probably going to see a sequel now because of it. And I think if you look at all the remasters they've been putting out over the past few years, like we're probably going to see more remasters of past like Crystal Dynamics and Deus Ex, or should I say Eidos Montreal games. And that's what really excites me about this is like not only are we going to see remasters for or remakes of games, like think about it like this: Deus Ex Human Revolution, in my opinion, is one of the best games ever made. You can only play it on Xbox One right now and Xbox Series consoles via backwards compatibility. You can't play it on PlayStation. You can't play it on Nintendo platforms. But now we could see the potential of them putting out a remaster because they did that with the Darksiders games, and a lot of people would buy a Human Revolution, remaster on these consoles, especially with these new consoles and higher resolutions and frame rates and ray tracing and all that stuff. And it's like these new games, I should say, these studios and these older IPs and stuff, like they're going to get new life. Like think about it like this: you mentioned before Gex, right? Not a lot of people remember Gex the Gecko. I do, and like we could probably see a remake now, probably by the team that's doing the Destroy All Humans remakes. Like that is awesome. And is it a shame that Microsoft couldn't get them? Aye, I'll say that all day. I wish Microsoft could have gotten them studios, but at the same time, we're gonna see a lot of remasters and possible sequels. Like, for instance, like Logan, what would you like to see from Embracer Group? Like from their, the past, I should say, the past catalog for Square Enix. I should say, uh, the thing is, I have to remember like 50 different names, so I'm gonna mix them up. But it's like, what would you like to see come back when it comes to existing IP?
Pretty much the ones that everybody throws out. And then like Gex. Personally to me, I loved Gex as a kid. I had it on Game Boy Advance and N64 and whatnot. I thought it was hilarious. I would love to see Gex come back. And then, like uh Deus Ex, like more of those. There's Soul Reaver, Legacy Kane, there's Thief. Like the last Thief game was it didn't do so well. But it had some interesting ideas, and I think a Thief reboot would be really, really interesting. And I think it's definitely a IP that has potential. And they inherited about 50 IPs in this deal, I believe. So there's a huge catalog that they can work with now. And then Tomb Raider, obviously, I think the reboot trilogy was one of my favorite trilogies of the last gen. Phenomenal. I loved them. Some of the games more than others, but I love the trilogy as a whole a ton. And then just there's so much potential with their games, and that I think the biggest thing is they don't have like the specter watching over them now. They're free. They're going to a place that wants to embrace. I know, LOL joke. Um, what they're doing with single player games, or they're not going to try to shoehorn in money hats or time packs and all this and that. They're just going to let them make what they want. And at the end of the day, that's what we should want as gamers, that the devs we like get to make the things they like because we like them. So it sounds like a win to me. Like I said, I would have loved it if Xbox could have gotten them, but if it was risk the AB deal and get them, or just let it go and make sure the AB deal goes, I mean, I think 10 out of 10 you have to make that deal. Just let it go. Um, I think it'll work out. And, like I said, HQ Nordic is kind of the Frankenstein publisher. Like they gather all these dormant IPs and are resurrecting them, like Time Splitters and all this other stuff. So, have a good history of treating things right, and I'm excited to see how they do.
Yeah, this is nothing but good news, especially for those studios. And I'll get into Square in a minute, but like we can see all these franchises return. And the thing is, I like how they put out games. You know, they market games in a timely manner, and then they put out a collector's edition. And here's the thing: THQ Nordic, they always put out a resin statue with a keyring, soundtrack, all that stuff. You know, steelbook. They do that for pretty much all their games. You know, even if it's a remaster of like a 20-year-old game, that's what they do. And we will see sequels. You know, people said Outcast would never get a sequel, and here we are. What, 5 years after the remaster came out or remake, and it's happening. You know, and we could see all these games return. Like you're saying, Legacy of Kain. That's the big one. A lot of people mention. Like I loved Legacy of Kain on the original PlayStation. Well, we're probably going to see a collection. And here's the thing. This is why I think we're going to see a lot of these games sooner rather than later. Is that the one of the board members of Embracer Group said that they expect to make the money back within 2 years. Now, $300 million is a lot to make back in 2 years, especially when like their new games aren't going to be out for another 3 years, 4. So we're probably going to see a lot of remasters slash remakes over the next 2 years, and for a lot of their properties, I'm happy to. Like again, Legacy of Kain, all the Tomb Raider games. Like there's the entire back catalogue of Tomb Raider games, and you know we could probably see maybe full next gen upgrades for the Tomb Raider trilogy. And I know a lot of people would love that. I personally want that. You know, maybe a little bit of ray tracing, more 4K, more 60 frames, but like. The possibilities are endless now, and the fact that we now live in a universe where Legacy of Kain's probably going to come back. Like, there's been like 5 like Legacy of Kain games cancelled over the past like 2 decades, so it's a good thing for them. But Square Enix, like, they've changed a lot. Like, remember in the 90s, they would put out quality product after quality product. It was just hit after hit after hit, like the meme, and like now they just like a shell of the former selves, and it's kind of sad. And you know, I can say it this way, that you know Square Enix, they're gonna fail when it comes to this whole blockchain stuff. Like gamers are not gonna stand for this whole NFT crap in games. We don't want it. Yes, you do have the odd person on Twitter with a bored ape or whatever you call them, like profile pictures, and it's like if you look at any of these profiles, everyone that owns NFTs in games, by the way, or should I say in the gaming community, if you look at their profile, they act like they're stock investors and like they know what they're talking about. It's like, no, you paid for a picture. Like, you think you know what you're doing with money. It's like, no, congratulations, I just did a screen grab, now I have it too. Like, digital ownership of items is stupid, you know? And I could go on all day about that because NFTs just really anger me, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's boring stuff, and Square Enix, they're just making bad decisions constantly. It's amazing how they do, like, just bad decisions all the time. Like, they're, in my opinion, their best studios, they just sold off for way less than they were worth, just to get invested into blockchain. Like, it's amazing. But, I mean, look, Square Enix, they don't know what they're doing. Like, look at Final Fantasy, right? Like, no, they won't let people know how long that exclusivity deal is for Final Fantasy VII Remake, yet they were okay letting people know in advance that, hey, you know, Rise of the Tomb Raider, Xbox exclusive, it's just a year. Like, they were okay letting people know that. And it's like, we've seen this a million times in the past, like, we don't know what games are coming to Xbox. And Square Enix, they're dumb for this, by the way. They bring the occasional game to Xbox, like they cherry pick things. Like Dragon Quest XI is now on Xbox. People loved it. The performance is great. The visuals are great. But when they announced Dragon Quest 12, they didn't let anyone know. When they announced Dragon Quest 2D HD or whatever it's called, they didn't let people know what platforms. And it's likely going to be Switch, PlayStation, and PC because Square Enix cannot make good decisions. Like we've talked about the whole cherry picking thing in the past, right? But surely it's not just me that really sees that, you know, there's a double standard. Like, Rise of the Tomb Raider, they had to tell everyone that it was going to be on PlayStation within a year. But, you know, Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's been, over 2 years now, and we don't know what the hell's happening? Like, what's your thought on that?
Uh, I mean, you could go very, very deep down this rabbit hole with the whole Square Enix and how they do things regarding Xbox and PlayStation and IPs and different standards. And, we'll toss you a bone here. It's like we'll toss you the third game in a series and expect you to just figure it out. And then eventually we'll port games later, but only, via this method, or we'll finally bring a series over, but then we're not going to bring the next one over, and we'll just be very vague in reasonings and just. And then, like you said, the whole timed thing, I would almost just say it's just an exclusive at this point on Fantasy Seven. I mean, it was back in the day when it came out all those years ago on the PlayStation 1. I think they kind of just are very committed, PlayStation is, to keeping it associated with their platform. And it seems like they're just willing to just keep that deal rolling. Um, Maybe someday it'll end, or maybe they're waiting on a certain offer from Xbox to throw them a huge bag of money for Game Pass, make up for quote unquote disappointing sales or whatever for the platform or whatever. But I don't know. To me, I'd be close to saying I just don't think that one's coming. Um, and in regards to their decision making, yeah, I mean, like you said, we could spend a whole episode literally on all the things that have been said or done that we find head scratching or odd. But you know, there's always the chance they end up looking like geniuses, I guess, if this thing somehow turned out great. And then we'd be like, well, I guess we were wrong. Kudos to them. They were committed. It also could very much be the guy hits the iceberg and he's just going down with the ship no matter what because it's what they said they're going to do and they're just going to stick to it no matter what. Or, I mean, there are some people floating the idea that maybe they're setting themselves up to be sold a little bit to PlayStation, perhaps. Um, like, they cut some excess fat off with the Western Division just gone. Maybe they purposely are fine with taking a big loss on those to just get them off so that they're easier to sell as a whole. I don't know, but I think that's one angle maybe to consider with them.
You're right in the whole like Sony thing. There have been rumors in the past that Sony's going to buy Square Enix. Although whenever I look online to see where those originated, it's just people's hopes basically. But like that purchase in general does make sense, and them getting rid of their Western arm so they could focus on Japanese studios. That kind of lines up with what Sony might be going for, and I think whenever it comes to these studio buyouts and these acquisitions, people get heated because they think, oh, this game's not going to be on my favorite platform anymore. But when you mentioned that, and I thought, none of the franchises I really care about anymore. Like, I care about Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy, but at the end of the day, I know those games may not even come to Xbox. So it's kind of like I've accepted it. But the fact that Deus Ex, Tomb Raider, Thief, those intellectual properties are now with Embracer Group, I don't worry about it. I think, okay, I'm going to get to play that on Xbox 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the line. So now, when the whole like Square Enix getting bought thing gets brought up now by Sony, it doesn't even bother me. like, congratulations, the buying studios I don't really care about anymore. Deus Ex, that's with Embracer Group. It's probably going to have the THQ Nordic logo next to it, which I'm fine with, and I'll play it on Xbox. But it's like, it does make sense, and Square Enix has had a lot of close ties with PlayStation in the past. So, yeah, that might end up happening. Or maybe Sony went to buy the Western division, but Embracer could pay more. Like, this will end up being something we hear about like down the line in like 5 years with like some expose or something. But it's interesting because like when Microsoft started buying studios, people just thought it was going to be platform holders. Well, if you look at Embracer Group and the amount of studios they have, like they bought Gearbox like last year. Like they just buying studios left and right. So like anyone anyone is up for grabs, basically. Even EA. EA have said in the past that they are looking to expand. Like, who knows? Maybe even they could buy Square Enix somehow, even though it's a Japanese company. But it's strange times we live in. You could wake up any day and have some studio get bought out. Like that's that's the reality now, which is kind of weird, but cool in a way because news can drop any day. Um, you know, I tend to rant about Square Enix every week because they just do dumb stuff all the time. But like when I see them selling off some of the best studios in the business, in my opinion, for NFTs and blockchain, like that just it makes me a piss boil. Like why would you do that? Like I did business at college, and like why am I smarter than these people at like business? Like that shouldn't be a thing. That should never be a thing. It's like that's the company that brought Kingdom Hearts 3 to Xbox, complained about its sales despite the fact it was the first game in the franchise to launch on the platform, and then they probably complained about the remasters of the first two games not doing so well because they didn't even market it. I had to tell people it was on Xbox. Like that news literally surprised people that those games were actually on Xbox. And to this day, there's people that tell me they didn't even know that Final Fantasy 15 was on Xbox. That's Square Enix's job to market games, and they're not doing the job. And they're going to continue to do that, and it's ridiculous. Anyway, we'll have to move on because I get heated about the whole Square thing. Speaking of the whole service thing, there's been leaks and rumors in the past of Ubisoft Connect coming to Game Pass, right? And a lot of people have thought this because EA, EA Access or EA Play is part of, Game Pass Ultimate. And, people have been thinking for months now that the service will come to Game Pass Ultimate and it'll be the same thing. But I'd lean away from that because a lot of people think Ubisoft Connect is like EA Play, but they're not. Ubisoft Connect is a lot more like Game Pass. You get new games day one, discounts to DLC and video games in the service, and they've been doing this service for a while now. It's like there's like over 100 games now because there's all the PC titles. So when I see that people are thinking that this service is going to come to Game Pass, I kind of shrug and think that maybe they're going to get some bespoke version of Ubisoft Connect that won't include day one games, because I can't imagine the amount of money Microsoft would have to spend to get literally all Ubisoft games day one in the service. I don't know, what's your thought on that? Am I crazy for thinking that?
No, I agree with you. I don't think they're gonna get a day one with all their Ubisoft games. I mean, at that price, you might as well consider buying Ubisoft at that point. Um, because, and we talked last time, they're reportedly eyeing potentially being bought. So, me, it wouldn't be worth it to try to pay for day one and just not have the company. I think they will probably be some modified version of some subscription thing that they would add to Game Pass, most likely.
Yeah, so it's not just me because like I keep like people gamers get the hopes up a lot, and people think some things that are just too unrealistic, and it's like I can't see Ubisoft signing a deal where or how much Microsoft would have to pay to get literally every Ubisoft game day one, because they're coming out with like a bunch of different games over the next year. They're coming out with the next Assassin's Creed title. They're coming out with Avatar. They're coming out with a Division spin-off. They're coming out with the Splinter Cell remake. They're coming out with the Prince of Persia remake, and that's just some of the announced games. And they've got over 20 games to show this summer. And I can't imagine a reality unless Microsoft owned Ubisoft, which I don't think that's going to happen. I can't imagine a reality where Microsoft sign a deal for who knows how many hundreds of millions of dollars to get all new games day one. Like people can clip this. I think there will be a bespoke version that joins Game Pass if it does join Game Pass. No day one games. Maybe you'll get the occasional one, but like look at it like this. Out of all of the Ubisoft games that's launched in the past 4 years since the existence of Game Pass, I believe only one game so far is launched day one in the service, and that was Rainbow Six Extraction or whatever it's called, like the game that just came out a few months ago. Like nobody's really talking about that now. I haven't played it yet. Like, but it was a big deal for a Ubisoft game to launch in the service day one. They may be testing out the waters to see what a day one game would do, on consoles because they're already doing that on PC with Ubisoft Connect. But it's interesting because you have all these different companies at the minute testing different types of services. Nintendo has their online service where it is basically ports of old games, and then you have Nintendo, shall I say, PlayStation doing their different tiers for their service, which I saw this the other day and like it's kind of confusing. But it's strange. It's strange, and we're probably going to see more about this Ubisoft stuff this summer. Again, Ubisoft's got a lot of games to show. They probably want to highlight the service in their showcase, and then we have the Microsoft show, which is also in June. But it's going to be a big year for announcements, especially when it comes to service-related stuff. Screw it. Let's move on to the whole Starfield stuff. So recently, a Starfield developer came out on a forum, I believe it was Reset Era or Reddit, and start talking crap about their own game. He's left now, apparently. Doesn't work with Bethesda anymore, but came out and said, like, the space flight isn't fun, the combat isn't fun, and it doesn't look as good as Horizon Forbidden West. Now, those three things stuck out a lot because it doesn't seem like something a developer would do. It seems extremely unrealistic that this game's using new tech. It's not the same. It's not the same old creation engine they've been using for years for Fallout 3, 4, and Elder Scrolls. Like this is a new engine. It's using photogrammetry that requires a powerful engine to take advantage of. And people seem surprised that a game called Starfield has space flight. Okay, that's a new one. What's your whole thought on this thing? Because it's kind of bizarre, really.
Well, yeah, I find the whole thing a little fascinating to me. One, you choose Reset Era, which for those who aren't involved in Reset Era, it's mainly a PlayStation leaning crowd. I would say put it that way. That's why Xbox Era was ended up getting founded, so that there was a place where Xbox fans felt that they could be comfortable and talk and be pro Xbox without getting harassed or having issues. And so they kind of, not saying they all do, but there does seem to be kind of a skew and lean towards PlayStation platform and stuff there. Okay, so that's number one for choosing Reset Era's platform to quote leak something. And then two, um, talking about, things that you don't find fun or you think this isn't as good as this or that. And then bringing up specifically Horizon Forbidden West. That's another thing because that's like, one, these aren't even the same game, same type of game. And then two, that's a infamous example of games that people in the fanboy community use to try to compare and downgrade other games to. Like they could have thrown Last of Us 2 out there and that would have made work just as well. It's like one of those games that for some reason is just always circulated and brought into these discussions even when it's not even in the same ballpark or type of game. And then the just kind of just coming off as like a bitter X type thing. Like if you don't leave on bad terms, like it seems really odd to just throw your game that you've been working hard on under the bus anonymously if you didn't leave on bad terms or weren't given the boot. So the whole thing just kind of reads kind of funky to me. But maybe it's accurate, maybe it's right on, and maybe the combat sucks, maybe the flight isn't that great, and maybe the game looks like junk, but I just have a hard time believing that personally.
Yeah, I mean, everything that was like said doesn't really line up with reality because like unless he was aiming to be fired, like that's exactly what you would say. Like you were saying, like he sounds like a bit of X. Definitely does. Definitely does. Like you wouldn't directly bring up just like a Sony game all of a sudden. Like you couldn't have said Assassin's Creed Valhalla. which is an amazing looking game, or a Plague Tale. Like, couldn't have mentioned all that, but had to mention a Sony game, and that's very suspicious. And again, using a forum like Reset Era, like those are red flags. you know, and as we know that's a heavily Sony focused website. But the thing is, when I saw this, it just read as attention seeking to me. Again, we're talking about it. A lot of people have been talking about it, and people are bringing up like, is that why we haven't seen it all of a sudden? It's like, no, that's how Bethesda talk about and show off their big first person RPGs. Like, look at Skyrim. That was announced a few months before E3. We got a gameplay demo at E3, and then it launched in the following November. Same with Fallout 4. Fallout 4 was announced just before E3. We got gameplay at E3, and then the game launched in November, I believe. Like, that's what they do. And just because it's like been years later, like, doesn't mean that's like them stopping how they market games. Like, that's a good way to build up anticipation. Like, Starfield is so hyped because we haven't had a game like this ever. Not really. Like, think about it. We've had the Mass Effect trilogy. We've had things like Skyrim. We've had things like The Witcher 3. But this game's promising to mix elements of all those RPGs. And we've not really had that. Yes, we've had sci-fi games and sci-fi RPGs, but nothing on this level. Like, Bethesda make interesting RPGs because choices matter. There's like hundreds of thousands of lines of dialogue. Like, they're very intricate RPGs with lots of dungeons and areas to explore, with lots of different just lore details. And it's like they're doing that with an open world space exploration game. I don't think they're gonna have full planets like No Man's Sky. That's unrealistic. But decent sized maps for different planets, like it's gonna be good. And there's a lot of anticipation and hype because of that. And when people say they don't understand the hype, you do. You do. You know why people are hyped about it. Like, it's a new Bethesda RPG. We haven't had a big Bethesda RPG since Fallout 4. And in my opinion, look, I'll be honest, I didn't like Fallout 4 that much because of its crafting system. That's why I stopped playing it. I just looked at how they did the scrap, and I was like, I can't do this. It's kicking in my OCD, and I just don't like it. But, Starfield's probably not going to do that. And if you watch all the video documentaries or Vidocs for Starfield, the world and universe they make, and it's very detailed. They've been extremely intricate about how things are designed, even things like forks and Tupperware in that universe. And it's like, I wouldn't worry at all. I'm surprised that people are shocked that a game called Starfield has space flight. That was a big thing this past week. I've seen articles saying you can fly spaceships in Starfield. No shit, Sherlock. Who would have thought? I was expecting that the whole time. Fair enough, you can't fly in Mass Effect, but that was a game of a different time. People weren't expecting to fly a spaceship in an Xbox 360 game in 2007. That's just unrealistic. But a game on Xbox Series X and S and PC, yeah, I think that's expected at this point. And for some reason, Siri's kicking off. But yeah, I think people need to calm down. Again, it's just it's another story for people to get concerned about. And if you look on the news every week, notice it's something else every week. It's something else that people have to concern troll. I remember people were concern trolling Gears 5 because of the amount of acts, because people all of a sudden thought acts meant length. You've obviously noticed how people just pick up on everything, yeah, and everything has to be a concern story.
I mean, you would think Twitter was filled with microbiologists, as much fine tooth combing and lenses these folks are going to look at things and try to find problems when there aren't problems. It's wild. I mean, there are legitimate criticisms to be had of some games out there, but the lengths some people go to try to find something or conjure something out of nothing is just wild. Concern trolling is at an all-time high, and it's just, I don't know. It just really detracts from what gaming's about and the enjoyment of games. At the end of the day, we want to play these games. We're not trying to be an investigative, journalist to try to tear this game apart and try to get down to the bottom molecules of it to where it's like, see, it's intrinsically flawed or this or this. It's like at the end of the day, do you like the game or not? I mean, it's it's just wild.
You know, this happens to a lot of games. Some news comes out about a game from a former developer. People get concerned. The game comes out and people enjoy it. Remember all the stuff that leaked about The Last of Us 2? Like, about its development, the crunch, the story, and all that stuff. And then when the game came out, the fans, well, from my perspective, fans seemed very pleased with the game. But it's like, there were developers saying before the game came out that, the game's not that good. It just happens a lot. And I think it's just these developers and people just wanting headlines. Because it clearly works. It happens all the time. It happens for other studios. You know, look at all the controversy like Ubisoft, and Activision, and everyone else has been in the past year. There are people that come out and they say legitimate things, but there's clearly people that want attention, and that attention is always focused around game stuff, not about people's lives or stuff. It's always about like this thing in a game that I don't like. It's terrible, blah blah blah. But it seems like attention seeking in my opinion, and it works. People are talking about it. Anyway, we'll move on because that's gotten enough attention. So this is quite surprising to some people that Warner Brothers games may be getting sold off. Discovery now own Warner Brothers and all that stuff, and they clearly wanting to clear house. They put out a statement saying that they wanting to sell off IPs, studios, or make partnerships with stuff. And it's crystal clear that Warner Brothers games, a publisher I like, it may not even be a thing 5 years from now. And apparently, Sony are interested, Microsoft are interested, and I believe I saw Ubisoft are interested, which is interesting. But like, I don't know. Like people see Marvel being connected to Sony in their games because they've got Spider-Man, they've got Wolverine coming out, and people look at Xbox thinking they need DC. And I actually agree with a lot of that because again, who knows how many different Marvel games that Sony are going to try and get associated to their console. Microsoft is in a place where they need a superhero game, exclusive or partnered or whatever. They need it on their platform. And then you look at things like Gotham Knights in development coming out this year. You can look at Hogwarts Legacy. You have Suicide Squad Killer Justice League next year. And there's Wonder Woman. And there's apparently a Superman game in development, from what I've heard. But it's like, people want Microsoft to get Warner Brothers games. Like, what's your thought on the whole, Warner Brothers game situation? Because it's all up in the air, and it's crystal clear that Microsoft's focus is Activision. Like they want this deal to go through. Like I don't think a lot of people understand how gargantuan this deal is with Activision, because that's literally that's billions of dollars per month in revenue, especially when it comes to things like Candy Crush, Call of Duty, Warzone, all that stuff. Like that is legitimate billions they can make annually without even trying. And then there's this Warner Brothers news, and that they might be interested. I don't know, what's your take?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that they are like 110% focused on getting this Activision deal done across the line, whether that's, getting it full approved or approved with concessions or court or whatever the case. I think they're just solely convinced and focused on that to where they don't want to risk any potential issues or more spotlight on them than they already have. Basically, Microsoft is like walking in a minefield right now or in a glass house and they're carrying a bunch of bricks. They don't want to have a trip or slip up. It and potentially, jeopardize that deal. They right or wrong, there's a lot of intense focus on them and attention on various things from different parties pushing things where they, it would seem, are just like, you know what, we just don't want to ruffle any feathers at all. If we lose out on Crystal Dynamics, even though we really like them and probably would have wanted them, but we get Activision Blizzard and all that stuff at the cost of losing them, so be it. And I think the same for Warner Brothers. If they could maybe work it to where, in an ideal world, where they could have both, I think they would like it. But I think licensing thing is the stickler. Because you remember we did this, this song and dance for several years now about Warner Brothers being for sale or not for sale, or they're back again for sale, or just kidding, they're not for sale. And it always, a lot of the time, comes down to licensing and how much they're asking for these things. Because, like, if you get all these studios, but you don't have the licensing that they're associated with, um, was their success due to the licenses that they were able to spin into gold, or is it entirely the talent there? And what about the IPs that they do come with, or do they not come with any IPs at all? And then you you look at all their studios, and it's like, well, would you buy a couple of them, or would you try to make a grab bag offer and get them all? And then what do these three studios, Monolith, Rocksteady, and NetherRealm are renowned, loved. What about the other ones? Have they really had this big of a track record of success? Besides the Lego games with Traveler's Tales, they're awesome. But aside from that, it's kind of a mixed bag. So it comes down to how much they want to sell it for, and is it really worth potentially causing issues for something else just to try to get too greedy and grab Warner Brothers. I think in a perfect world, they would like both if they could get a good deal. I'm just not convinced that they can get a good deal or it would be worth causing issues for the other thing. Maybe if they could revisit this next year after the deal is done, one way or another, and maybe so. Maybe they can just buy them the next day. But I don't know. I just think it's a slippery slope they're working with right now.
Yeah, it's a weird situation because I agree. Like, I think Microsoft would be all in on Warner Brothers games. Like the talent, like they have a fighting game studio. They have multiple open world action game studios. Like, and the intellectual properties alone would be worth it. The Batman game license, or should I say DC game license and stuff. Mortal Kombat. Um, just makes so much sense. You have like the Shadow of Mordor games, and I think Microsoft. You're right. I think Microsoft's probably just hoping like no one buys them until next year, because as soon as the Activision deal's done, they can just go back to buying studios as they please. Because look, Sony's buying tons of studios at the minute. No one's batting an eye because it's not a big publisher. But when this whole thing's done, like Microsoft can just buy Warner Brothers games, or the studios, and this whole like Activision nonsense will be a thing anymore, because like look, everyone's eyes at the minute are focused on the Activision deal. People are wondering when it's going to go through, if it's going to go through, and how. you know and as we were saying before we went live, like there's a clear bias to seeing like people in the media and like how they talk about the Activision deal, and like if it's likely to happen. Like we'll say it, right. you know Apparently, allegedly, Jason Schreier. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name right. I don't care. But apparently, like he's like very actively against the whole Activision deal. Like he talks about how it's not going to happen, and a lot of people like think it's not going to go through, and how he thought that the shareholders were going to be against it, and then we saw, oh yeah, 98% of the shareholders were for the deal. Like, so who's he talking about? Like, he's clearly not talking about the shareholders and these other people in the industry who are actively against the whole Activision thing. They're talking about themselves. They really don't want this to happen, because I think that these people in the media, like the Jason Schreier, however you pronounce his last name, these people are scared that Microsoft is seriously going to compete. The Xbox Series X and S, they coming out and they selling really well in a time when there's a worldwide chip shortage. Xbox Game Studios is growing a lot. They're coming out with a bunch of games that people want and like. The games that came out in the past year are being highly rated. And it's like, Microsoft is in a place now, even without the Activision deal, like they are officially competing again. We are not even in the Xbox 360 era because Microsoft didn't have a lot of studios back then. This is going to be a bigger deal. But when the Activision thing goes through and they have Call of Duty in Game Pass, like that takes, honestly, I think that takes Game Pass from 25 million to 50 million just for Call of Duty alone, because there's millions of people out there that literally switched consoles because they thought they were going to get maps early. And here we are years later, where maps, as far as I know, launch day and date on both consoles now. Again, nobody talks about the multiplayer because of Warzone and all that stuff. But it's like we're in a place right now where Microsoft is serious about gaming to the point where Satya Nadella always talks about Xbox and gaming in their financial reports. Xbox makes more money than Windows, which is a strange thing to say because, Microsoft is Windows. And it's like it just goes to show like how far Microsoft have come, and they still wanting to compete, they still wanting to grow, and then you have people in the media like Jason Schreier, whatever blog post he works for now, and it's like these people do not want Microsoft to get any more competitive. Like in an ideal world, I think these people just want Sony and Nintendo to compete with each other. There's people still better that Microsoft got in the gaming space in 2001. All these years later, still bitter. And it's like they are unwilling to let Microsoft compete, and so they hoping this whole deal goes through. And we'll just go to the whole, Warren Buffett thing. Like, you followed the whole thing, like, so I'll let you take the whale because the whole Activision Blizzard deal has been a doozy to follow over the past, 3 months? So, what have you seen on the whole, like, Warren Buffett thing? Because, again, you mentioned before the show went live, like, Jason Schreier allegedly said some stuff.
Yeah, like everybody's entitled to have opinions on things and like focuses and if they think something's gonna go a certain way or not. I mean, I totally understand that. It's just it was funny that there was an article written that had a headline talking about that the investors were betting it would fail, and then like literally a few days later, Warren Buffett, who if you don't know in the stock world, he's like very very successful investor and has been so for decades. His company Berkshire went in and bought 9.5% of all Activision Blizzard shares as a sign of like they thought it was a good bet, a good gamble to buy that now in their faith in the deal happening. And he made it clear, for legal reasons and other things that he doesn't know how the deal's going to go, yada yada. He doesn't have inside information, but he thought it was a good bet that it was an event purchase based on okay, Microsoft has announced their plans to buy this company, so he sees it as a good trend that okay, they've announced this price, it's significantly more than what it's trending at now. Assuming the deal goes through, we would make an obscene amount of profit from this. And he thought it was a good enough bet that he did it. And then lo and behold, after he does that, the price has gone up like $3 or so. Since that alone, it's been trending upwards. More people are getting positive. It's it's just to show that when people who are involved in these things for their livelihood and their business, who are the stock people, think it's a good bet, then that certainly doesn't hurt their cases for the thing. And it just in general, it's not about one individual or one publication. It's just it seems like about whatever it is in the gaming sphere that certain platforms just get different coverage than others, and how there seems to be a lot more FUD spread for one than the other, or um, click pieces or hate pieces come out that try to tear one down, while curiously enough, ignoring or altogether just not mentioning similar things that happen to other ones. It just is what it is at this point, but it's always a little irritating.
Over the past 24 hours, there's been a lot of memes over what you said because, look, people are against Microsoft buying studios because it's a monopoly. Yeah, Embracer Group buying, what, 100 studios over the course of 5 years? Like, that isn't a monopoly. But whenever you mention this, people will say, but Embracer Group doesn't own a platform. It's like, so we are literally changing the definition of the word monopoly just to suit a narrative right now. Like that's what it came down to. It's like, you know, I think it's okay for people to be critical of these things, right? If people are worried that, one of these companies being bought is fundamentally going to change or potentially ruin the studio or publisher, I think it's worth mentioning. But everything we've seen in the past, it all works in Microsoft's favor. They are number one on Glassdoor. They are the best place to work in the US. Like, that says a lot. And we've all seen in the news everything with Activision in the past 16 months. Like, Activision has been a very terrible place for people to work. It hasn't been safe for people to work there. And look, people need Bobby Kotick out there. They need him out right now. And I believe, like, when this whole deal goes through and it's all finalized next summer, it's like he's going to be out the door. Yeah, he will be receiving a fat check for basically getting to leave. But at the end of the day, him leaving, different management, and all that stuff, it's going to make Activision better. We're going to see different games from all their studios. Call of Duty may not be like, it might not be this forced yearly product. Because think about it at the minute, like, who's really talking about Halo, I should say, Call of Duty multiplayer that isn't Warzone? Like, you have the Call of Duty like fans playing like those multiplayer modes, but everyone's talking about Warzone all the time. And it's like, maybe we can give Call of Duty more support and then have a game come out every 2 years and then have these developers not work to the bones, every single year to get this product out. Because Call of Duty, fun games in my opinion, but we don't need a new one every single year. We don't need that. We need a good game every so often when it's ready. And they have like all these support studios. Like, Raven Software is now a support studio that makes updates. Like, that's
It's
hard.
such a tragedy.
Yeah, it's a tragedy. It's like if people ever get the chance, and if this deal goes through, and we get Singularity, either backwards compatible or via a remaster, like, play Singularity. It's very much like a Bioshock game, in like Soviet Russia type thing, and it's a very cool setting. But we don't get games like that anymore. And the fact that that team, that studio, makes Call of Duty maps and Call of Duty updates, like that's heartbreaking. Like, there's all the like the studio that made the Tony Hawk games make Call of Duty maps. Like, how is that even a reality? The studio that made Spyro the Dragon, the last one I shall say, like, makes Call of Duty stuff. Like, they don't need that much like support for those games. And like, are we saying like look at it like this? People talk about wanting Halo content. Like, they have like 45,000 studios making Call of Duty content, and they get about two maps every other month. Like, something's not adding up. They don't need to patch the games that much. Anyway, that's a rant for another day. But I think it's I think the Activision deal is going to go through. Them not going for Warner Brothers right now makes sense. Although apparently they are interested. Maybe there's some sort of holding deal in place where they can get them a year from now, but they're going to spend, more money. Like Microsoft, they have the pockets to do pretty much whatever they want. But it's going to be an interesting time because, again, Microsoft, they clearly all in on gaming, and they are willing to, like, look, they're going to spend what's $60+ billion to get Activision. Like, that's a gaming focus like purchase, and it's like, it's crazy. It's really crazy what we're going to see over the next year. And last topic before we go, Microsoft announced their summer showcase, which is going to be in June, early June, pretty much in the place of E3, because E3 isn't happening this year. No digital E3, but Microsoft is still showing their own games. And obviously there isn't much to talk about that, but there's been rumors that Microsoft have basically games from almost every single studio to show. And when I first saw that, I thought, well, I know there's a lot of games that's going to be shown there that people might not be expecting, but like, if you look at all their studios, like, a lot of their studios make multiple games. Playground games, multiple games. You know, the Gears team, the Coalition, apparently they making two different games. Like, there's a lot of studios with a lot of games to show. And if you look at the already announced games like Avowed, Starfield, The Outer Worlds, Redfall, Forza Motorsport, Fable, Perfect Dark, State of Decay 3, the list goes on. Like, we're going to see games that haven't been announced yet. And we're going to see footage of games that have been announced. And, it's exciting because, again, big summer showcase from Xbox. But what are you expecting from this, Logan?
I expect it to be a pedal to the metal show. I think it's going to be awesome. I'm glad to see that it's one show. It's Xbox Bethesda together instead of separated. I'm glad that they're continuing to hone in that Bethesda and Xbox are one thing now. I think that helps with awareness for the brand. So that's awesome. And then, yeah, like, I mean, that would be a pretty long show if they have every single studio with at least one thing to show, which would be awesome. Or maybe it's just like a quick little montage and there's technically a little highlight thrown from each studio. But regardless, they have so much content in the pipeline, it's ridiculous. Like, you mentioned several studios have several projects. Obsidian's got Avowed, they've got the Outer Worlds too. And, Grounded still technically hasn't left early access yet, so they could have the full launch of that as well. And then, there's Intimate, which is rumored to be in development by them. Jez Corden had leaked that in the past. And then there's also their in early stages of talking about doing a new Vegas type game again. So Obsidian has their hands full. They have quite a bunch in the pipeline. Then, what's id Software doing? They just finished Doom Eternal content. Are they working on the rumored Quake reboot, or do they have something else in the pipeline? Then, Perfect Dark. It's about time for an update on that. We're gonna see Starfield. I mean, I think you can take that to the bank. Starfield's gonna be a primary focus there. Halo's gonna be there. I'm pretty sure about that. Obviously, they have a lot to discuss. Maybe announce the battle royale thing officially there. Then they have global partnerships with IO and some other studios. Maybe they officially reveal those or update Contraband or maybe I don't know. Maybe it's time to give an update on Everwild. Make sure that game's still alive and kicking. Um, there's just so much in the pipeline. You could like throw a whole bunch of names in a hat, shake it up, and just grab a handful, and you would get something different every time. It's crazy, and I'm super excited for it.
You just remind me of a few games that I completely forgot about. There is the new IP that IO Interactive are working on for Microsoft, and that is the Dragon, I should say, Monster Hunter type game, which we're probably going to see this year because IO Interactive are making two games concurrently at the minute. There's the Bond game and there's the Monster Hunter style game. But like you're saying, Obsidian are making, I think it's a 16th century detective RPG. Like, that hasn't been announced yet. Like, the thing about Obsidian is that they can make like a lot of games with small teams. Like The Outer Worlds was made with a small team, and it's a decent size RPG. So we're gonna see a lot. So when I hear the whole, almost all studios have something to show, I can kind of, see it happening. But then it comes to like how long's the show? Because as you were saying, like the Bethesda and Xbox showcase thing, it's one thing, it's not two. Because Bethesda always used to have their own show, and their show used to be pretty long. It used to be about 2 hours long, and they used to show, even mobile games, but updates on things. And then you have In Exile, which has been rumored to be working on remasters as well as new games because they have two Unreal Engine 5 games in development. So, like, honestly, like, I think Microsoft's best show to date was 2018, when they had the studios announcements there, and then they had like the other games showing. But like, honestly, if this console, like, I should say, showcase lines up with everything everyone's saying, and it's like almost all of their studios, like this could be one of the best showcases. Like they're going to have another data themselves. And again, Obsidian making multiple games, Playground Games, multiple games. Like, we're probably going to, in my opinion, we're going to see a Avowed gameplay as well as Starfield. I think we're going to see more gameplay than people think. There's still partner titles that we need to know more about, like Bright Memory Infinite for console. Still no date, but it's confirmed to come to Game Pass, I think. I think it's coming to Game Pass. But, like, there's a lot of titles, like A Plague Tale Requiem. That's coming to Game Pass and Xbox this year, but there's no date yet. So the list goes on. It's like, it's going to be exciting. So we have just over a month to go, but the thing is about Xbox stuff, and we notice this every year. Everything Xbox, not the podcast, but everything Xbox leaks like the week before E3, and I just hope, because the thing is, whenever I find out something, I don't talk about it because it kind of diminishes the announcement. Because talking about a leak on YouTube, for instance, doesn't really get much attention because it's not really a thing people know about. Like, if I start posting videos about a 16th century Obsidian RPG that nobody's ever heard of, it's not a search term. So what's the point of talking about it? So that's why I don't talk about leaks. It's pointless. But I think that, whoever has like legitimate leaks when it comes to documents, stop posting this stuff. I don't post it. People should stop posting that crap. It diminishes the announcement, and it doesn't really get anyone clicks. Like, by the way, when people announce leaks on Twitter, why are you doing that? Like, you're gonna do that for a few likes and a few followers. Like, I get it, maybe someone doing it for the YouTube channel because it gets into the algorithm and it gets more subscribers. But when people do that crap just on Twitter, it's literally just for clout. Like, in clout in the sense of likes and follows. Like, it's silly, but yeah, the week up till launch, I should say, the week up until the game showcase, it's going to be interesting because, again, that's when all that stuff leaks. Microsoft's rumored to be getting a streaming stick out this year, which has been rumored for years. Microsoft's had a small Xbox rumored since the Xbox 360 era. They were going to come out with an Xbox 360 Mini that was only going to play indie games. Then they shelved the idea. Then they were going to put out a streaming stick for the Xbox One era. They didn't. But now that streaming is literally, a huge part of gaming now, it makes the most sense. Especially in line with something I've just read on Twitter. IGN just put out an article talking about how Intel now thinks that the chip shortage is going to last to 2024. Now, that's going to hurt a lot of people because a lot of people don't have next-gen consoles. Like, that's the reality of the situation. Yes, Xbox is selling well, PlayStation's selling well, and also Switch, but, like, it's going to be very hard for people to get next-gen consoles on a regular basis for the next 2 years. And that's one of the reasons why I don't have a problem with cross-gen games. Like, Logan, what's your thought on the whole, like, cross-gen game thing, and the whole, like, the chip shortage lasts until 2024. That's kind of big.
Yeah, my thoughts on cross-gen, I've never had a problem with it, frankly. There's been a few examples, I guess, like where Halo or something, where I could see like maybe them having to um set aside time to work on a different version could have maybe made things more complicated for some features or for some modes or this or that. But for the most part, I think, make it as widely available as you want. And if people are buying it, then clearly they want it. And we had cross gen all the way back in you know, PS2, PS3, Xbox 360 era for a whole bunch of games. It was just a thing that happened for a few years. And I think with the chip shortages continuing till 2024 supposedly, and I think cross gen is just going to stick around for a little bit longer. And honestly, I think that makes this generation's life cycle longer than I would have initially predicted. It's looking more and more likely we're gonna have like a 360 or longer type life cycle for this gen than a quicker one like others were predicting before this gen. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all. It just means that we're just gonna be in this interface for quite some time, is my guess.
Yeah, I mean, my whole stance on the cross-gen thing, and my cross-gen like stance hasn't changed. I put out a video in early 2020 talking about the whole like cross-gen thing, and my opinion hasn't changed. I think it's fine. This isn't the 360 era moving to the Xbox One era. This isn't where Dying Light had to get cancelled because you know they were working with like what, half a gigabyte of RAM, and then less than that on the PS3 with split memory, and it's like it's not the same situation. Like the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, as dated as those like consoles were when they came out, they're still capable. Like we're gonna see games for years, and it doesn't bother me. Like we've seen that developers can scale games across multiple pieces of hardware. I mean, they do that on PC all the time. And at the end of the day, these consoles that we have, they're just PCs and fancy boxes. Like that's what they are. And the chip shortage lasts not long. I think you're right. It's gonna elongate, the generation rather than maybe 5 years, which is probably what they're going to aim for this gen. It's probably going to be 7 or 8. Fortunately, the consoles we have now have powerful CPUs in them. It's not like the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 where those CPUs, the Jaguar CPUs, were just old and janky. It's not the same situation. I think the hardware we get out, it's going to be fine. It's really going to be fine. In the games, like look at the games that's cross-generation right now coming out this year. Like Gotham Knights, as far as like right this moment goes, it's cross-gen, looks fine. Hogwarts Legacy, cross-gen. And, we do have a lot of exclusives coming to next gen, but at the end of the day, you're going to be able to play those on your current gen consoles, or I should say last gen consoles via streaming. Just make sure you have a good internet connection. But, it's going to be an interesting gen ahead, especially, how the studio situation is going to line up with. Because the thing is, if Microsoft do get Activision, a lot more people are going to be looking for hardware. And apparently Microsoft paid for chip priority. So, who knows what's going to happen there. But, yeah, it's been a good show, man. And if anyone's wondering why the sounds keep going on and off, it's because I'm keep having to move around my mic. Story for another day. But, Logan, have you got anything gaming related coming up when it comes to articles or stuff?
Not at the moment, but there's certainly been a doozy of news lately, so not lacking for ideas for going forward.
All right, cool. It's been a good show, man, and everyone in chat has been awesome. Again, YouTube hasn't really been doing their thing, sharing stuff out. That always happens to be the case, especially with live streams. So if you enjoyed the show, please hit like, share, and subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications. You'll be notified from the next video. And in the last show, I talked about why I haven't put out a video in the past few weeks, and due to copyright issues. Well, after some stuff in the past week, I finally got it all sorted. It won't be an issue anymore, and I'm able to put out videos again from this week. Videos about Starfield, some other Xbox exclusive stuff, and some Xbox related tech. And I have a video coming out soon about backwards compatibility I think people will really like. And that's all coming soon. Again, follow me on the channel. Our social links will be in the Twitter down below. Or should I say in the description down below. I'm very tired. It's been a long day. And yeah, we will be back next week. I just want to say that, again, the video will be out this week. All the copyright issues are sorted. And again, if you've enjoyed the show, please like, share, and subscribe on Twitter. I have a lot of cool things planned. And the thing is, I'm very bad at explaining things coming in the future. I just want to say that I have on-camera content coming soon. Pretty much, I want to aim for halfway through May. I've got some very professional stuff planned. And yeah, I hope everyone has a good day. I've got good stuff coming. We are out. Peace.